Mm-mm. The moment my brother finished his toast, he turned to me and said, loud enough for every table to hear, "We're buying you out, effective tonight." I was still holding my wine glass, the annual family gala. 200 people in the room. The chandelier light was catching the crystal, throwing little prisms across the tablecloths, and my brother was smiling at me like he'd just done me a favor. I set the glass down, very carefully, and I said, "Tell the attorney to be in the conference room at 9 tomorrow morning." He laughed, actually laughed, patted my shoulder like I was a child who'd said something amusing. That was the last mistake he'd ever make at my expense. I was 22 the first time I understood what my family actually thought of me. My dad had built Kellerman Freight Solutions from 3 trucks and a rented storage unit in Reno, Nevada. By the time I was old enough to understand what the business was, it occupied a full warehouse district near the edge of town, the kind of place where the air smells like diesel and cardboard and something almost like ambition. I grew up there in a way that had nothing to do with childhood and everything to do with learning how a company breathes. My brother, 3 years older, always louder, always the one in the photos, had a different relationship with the business. He liked the idea of it, the title, the weight of saying my family owns this at parties. What he didn't like was the 7 a.m. inventory calls, the carrier disputes, the weeks when you had to choose between making payroll and replacing the axle on a truck that had been running past its service date for 4 months. I did those things. I started doing them at 22 because my dad asked me to and because no one else was going to. He handed me a contract that year, straight salary, decent number, more than my friends were making at their first jobs. I slid it back across the desk. "I want equity," I said. My dad looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. "The salary's better." "For now," I said, "but equity compounds." He didn't argue. He just pulled out a separate sheet. A transfer agreement he'd had drawn up for something else entirely, I think, and amended it by hand. 12% initialed at the bottom. He signed it while his phone was ringing, and he was already reaching for it with his other hand. I don't think he registered what he'd done as significant. My brother was leaning in the doorway when I came out. "What were you two talking about?" "Just the contract," I said. He nodded and went back to whatever he'd been doing. He never asked to see the paperwork. That was the first document I put in the folder I kept in the fireproof safe under my desk. It would be 8 more years before the folder got thick enough to matter. Those 8 years had a shape to them that I only recognized later, when I had enough distance to see the whole thing at once. My brother took the title of VP of Operations in year 3, which meant in practice that he showed up to the big client meetings and I prepared the materials for them. When we landed a distribution contract with a regional grocery chain that year, a deal I'd been building for 7 months, 3 revised proposals, 2 site visits, the press release named him as the lead negotiator. My name wasn't in it. I remember reading it on my phone in the parking lot. I read it twice. Then I put my phone in my bag and went back inside and kept working, because the contract still needed an operations plan attached to it and nobody else was going to write one. My dad noticed things selectively. He noticed when my brother wore the right suit to a meeting. He noticed when my sister-in-law posted photos of their new house that looked expensive and successful. What he didn't notice were the quarterly reports I restructured so the bank would extend our credit line, or the vendor dispute I settled before it became a lawsuit, or the 18 months I spent untangling a software migration that my brother had greenlit without consulting anyone who actually understood the systems. I had an aunt who would come to family dinners and ask me every single time if I was still helping out at the company. I always said yes, because arguing felt like more energy than it was worth. And because I had learned very early that the people in my family who made noise got managed and the people who did the work got more work. I chose the work. Every time. That's not noble. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't a strategy, not at first. It was just the only thing I knew how to do. But somewhere around year 6, it did start to become something else. I started keeping records differently. Not out of suspicion exactly, more like the way you check the locks before bed. Not because you think someone will break in, but because you're the kind of person who checks the locks. I documented every deal I led. I filed copies of every agreement that had my name in it anywhere, even in the margins. When my brother made operational decisions without me, and he did this more and more, especially as the company grew, I wrote contemporaneous notes and stored them in a folder on an encrypted drive. I also started reading the bylaws. That probably sounds dry. It was dry. I read them at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night while the rest of the house was quiet, with a highlighter that I never actually used because I didn't want to mark a document I might need to produce later. I read them again 6 months later. I had a corporate attorney, a woman named Patricia, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and billed at a rate that made me wince, and I started meeting with her once a quarter. It was Patricia who first explained to me what my equity position actually meant. 12% from my dad, then another 9% from a transfer he'd signed 2 years later when I asked for compensation for a project that had generated 11 times its budget in new revenue. Then 7 more, quietly, in year 5, when I structured a refinancing deal that saved the company $400,000 in interest over the next decade. My dad signed the transfer while he was eating lunch. He always signed when he was distracted by something else. 28% accumulated over 8 years. Patricia looked at me over those beaded glasses and said, "You're the second largest individual shareholder in this company. Does your family know that?" "No," I said. She nodded slowly. "That's interesting. The Gala was my brother's idea. He'd been running the company officially for 18 months by then. My dad had stepped back for health reasons, handing my brother the CEO title in a transition that I was informed of 3 days before it happened. Not consulted on, not included in the announcement meeting. Just told the way you tell someone what time dinner is. My brother redecorated the executive floor, hired 2 new VPs who were his college friends, and started hosting a lot more client events. He was good at events. He had a quality of performing competence that read as actual competence to people who weren't paying close attention. The gala was billed as the company's 20th anniversary celebration. The Reno Grand Ballroom. 200 guests. An open bar that I knew was costing more than the quarterly maintenance budget for our Sparks warehouse location, which had a heating system that had been unreliable since February. I went because not going would have been noticed. My name was in the program, not as a company executive or a shareholder, as family. 1 line, Kellerman family in attendance. My brother was profiled in 3 paragraphs with a photo. My father was described as founder and patriarch. I was listed between 2 cousins who had nothing to do with the business. I found my seat. Table 9. My brother was at the center table. When he came over to greet me, he had a glass of whiskey in one hand and the particular smile he gets when he thinks something is already decided. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said. "We're simplifying the ownership structure." "Okay," I said. "We're buying you out. It's a fair number. Patricia can send you the paperwork." He'd been talking to Patricia. My Patricia. Or, I understood in that moment, his Patricia now, since technically she worked for the company, not for me personally. I had a different attorney. I had retained one 8 months earlier, a quiet man named David who worked out of a small office near the university and who had helped me draft 2 documents that were currently sitting in a fireproof safe, along with everything else. I didn't say any of that. I looked at my brother for a moment. The whiskey glass, the suit that fit well, the easy confidence of someone who had never checked the locks. And I said, "Tell the attorney to be in the conference room at 9 tomorrow morning." He laughed. He genuinely laughed. He patted my shoulder and moved on to the next table. I stayed for dinner. I ate the salmon, which was overcooked, and made appropriate conversation with the people around me. And when the speeches started, I watched my brother at the podium talking about vision and legacy and the next 20 years of Kellerman Freight Solutions. I watched my dad at the center table looking proud in the way he always looked proud when my brother was performing well. I watched the room respond to my brother, the way rooms always responded to him, warmly, easily, without skepticism. I left before dessert. I drove home in the quiet, 22 minutes on the highway, the kind of Nevada night where the sky is very dark and very clear and the distance feels infinite. I kept the radio off. I had been planning what came next for 8 months and there was nothing left to think through. It was just a matter of execution. I changed out of my dress. I made coffee. I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and the folder I had carried in my bag, the physical one, the backup copy, because I believe in redundancy. The first email went to David. He was expecting it. We had a protocol. He would begin filing first thing in the morning. The second set of emails went to the 4 independent board members, people my dad had appointed in year 2 when the company took on outside investment. People who were contractually obligated to take shareholder actions seriously and who had, over 8 years, seen enough of my actual work to trust the numbers when numbers came from me. The emails contained a single attachment each, a summary document, 12 pages, prepared over the course of 3 weeks with David's help, laying out my equity position, the history of each transfer, and the clause I needed them to understand before 9 the next morning. The clause was not flashy. It was 3 sentences buried in Section 9.4 of the shareholder agreement my dad had signed when the company first incorporated, a document that my brother had certainly never read and that my father had signed on the advice of an attorney who had since retired. It said, essentially, that any buyout of a shareholder holding more than 15% equity required a supermajority board vote, not a simple majority. Not just executive approval, and that any shareholder subject to an uninitiated buyout had the right to call an emergency board session within 30 days of notification. My brother had notified me that night, in the Reno Grand Ballroom, in front of 200 witnesses. The 30-day clock had started, but I wasn't going to wait 30 days. I sent the board emails at 10:47 p.m. I had a read receipt on each one. By midnight, 2 of the 4 had opened them. By 6 the next morning, all 4 had. I know because I was awake. The conference room at 9 was not what my brother was expecting. He arrived at 8:50 with Patricia and one of his new VPs, the one who handled acquisitions. They had a folder. They had a number written on paper. The buyout offer, which was based on a valuation that did not account for the refinancing deal I had structured 5 years earlier. The one that had made the company's balance sheet look substantially healthier than it would have otherwise. A convenient omission. David arrived at 8:58. The 4 board members were already in the room. My brother stopped in the doorway. His eyes moved around the room twice, taking inventory. Then they landed on me. "What is this?" he said. "An emergency board session," I said. "Called pursuant to Section 9.4. You can't just, she can," said the board member at the far end of the table. His name was Howard, and he had been on the board since the beginning, and he was the fastest reader I had ever met. He had clearly been up since before 6. "Please sit down. We have a filing to review." My brother sat down. What followed was 2 hours that I will not describe in unnecessary detail, because the facts were not complicated. They only looked complicated if you had not been paying attention for 8 years, which my brother had not. David walked through the equity history. The board members asked questions. Patricia, to her credit, answered them honestly when she could and said I need to verify that when she couldn't, which was often. The buyout offer was withdrawn before 11 o'clock, not because anyone forced it to be, but because the board voted 4-0, my brother abstaining, which was the correct procedure, to commission an independent valuation of my equity stake before any buyout proceedings could continue. And the independent valuation, which took 6 weeks and came back 40% higher than my brother's number, had consequences. My brother resigned 3 months later. He said it was to pursue other opportunities. His LinkedIn post was very gracious. I didn't respond to it. The company is different now. Not louder, not flashier, just steadier. In the way that things get steady when the people running them are actually paying attention. I kept the Reno warehouse, fixed the heating system in Sparks in April. We have a distribution contract now that covers 4 states, built over 14 months of conversations I led, with a negotiation team I chose, documented at every stage. My dad called me last month. It was a short conversation. He said he was proud of me, and I said thank you, and there was a long silence that contained everything neither of us was going to say. And then we talked about the weather in Florida and said goodbye. My brother and I don't speak, not out of anger. Anger would require energy I don't have for him. It's more that we have simply stopped occupying the same space, and that has turned out to be fine. There is an aunt who still asks, at family gatherings, if I'm still helping out at the company. I say yes, because some habits are not worth breaking, and because what I am actually doing at the company is nobody's business but mine and the board's. Some people believe that power is loud, that it announces itself at podiums and demands to be seen. They are wrong, and they find that out eventually. Power is a clause buried in paragraph 4 of a document no one bothered to read. It is a folder in a fireproof safe that gets thicker every year. It is equity that compounds while everyone else is looking at the suit and the whiskey glass and the smile. I learned that in a warehouse in Reno when I was 22 years old, and I never forgot it. If this is the kind of story that stays with you, the ones families don't talk about, the ones that only make sense when you see the whole shape of them at once, stay close to this channel. There are more of them, and they all end the same way. I thought a lot about what my brother actually believed that night. Standing at the podium, whiskey in hand, announcing in front of 200 people that I was being bought out. I don't think he expected a fight. I think he expected me to be embarrassed, to go quiet the way I'd always gone quiet, absorb it, process it alone in the car on the drive home, and eventually sign whatever Patricia slid across the table. That's the thing about being the one who does the work without making noise about it. People start to confuse your patience with passivity. They read your consistency as compliance, and somewhere along the way, they stop seeing you as a person with agency and start seeing you as a fixture, something that will always be there, always functioning, never a threat. My brother made that mistake for 8 years, and in a way I let him because I was too busy building something to spend energy correcting his assumptions. But here's what I've come to understand about cause and effect, about the way choices accumulate over time, whether or not you're paying attention to them. Every document my dad signed without reading was a choice. Every bonus my brother took credit for was a choice. Every time I was handed more work and fewer words of acknowledgement, and I filed a note instead of making a scene, that was a choice too. None of it was neutral. All of it was building toward something, even when no one in the room could see it yet. The outcome of that morning, Howard at the head of the conference table, the board vote, the independent valuation, didn't come from luck. It came from 8 years of decisions made quietly and consistently in the direction of something real. That's not a strategy I'd call comfortable. There were years when it felt like invisibility, like I was doing everything and receiving nothing, like the structure I was holding up would never be credited to me. Those years were hard in a specific way that's difficult to explain, not dramatic, not crisis level, just the slow weight of being underestimated by people who were supposed to know you. What kept me going wasn't anger. Anger burns fast and leaves you tired. What kept me going was something more like integrity, the stubborn commitment to doing the work correctly even when no one was watching, documenting things precisely even when it felt excessive, reading the bylaws at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday because someone had to and it might as well be me. That discipline, over time, became the most valuable thing I owned, more valuable than the title I never had, more valuable than the credit I was never given. I think about the people who watched my brother at that podium and thought he looked powerful. He did look powerful. He had all the signals, the suit, the room, the microphone. What he didn't have was the foundation, and when the foundation shifted, there was nothing underneath him. That's the part I want to leave with you. Not the satisfaction of the vote, not the image of him sitting down at that conference table while David walked through the equity history. Those things happened and they mattered, but they're not the lesson. The lesson is earlier than that. The lesson is in the choice to build quietly, to protect what you've made, to take the long view when everyone around you is optimizing for the moment. Intelligence without patience is just cleverness. Resilience without direction is just stubbornness. But when you combine the two, when you know what you're building and you refuse to stop building it no matter how little recognition comes your way, that becomes something that can't be taken from you, not by a buyout, not by a Gala announcement, not by anyone who stopped paying attention too soon.